humanity find itself at the crossroads. As we usher in a new era, the dance between man and machine echoes with the pounding heartbeat of an uncertain future. The fear of the unknown has always been a companion in our journey. And now, as we embark on a convergence of human and artificial intelligence, it manifests in a new form. This silent whisper of fear grips us, contemplating the possibility that machines, born of our brilliance, might one day surpass the very essence of our existence.
Expecting something a little bit more serious than that? All right, that's enough of that. We had to declare the existence of a piano. You know, we have to start somewhere. So this is a conference about artificial intelligence, as you know. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with this idea of the shadows of darkness. You know, this fear that we're in, perhaps. Or perhaps this unreasonable exuberance about what the future might hold with the help of artificial intelligence. So what I'm going to try and do is, since I'm speaking to a general audience, it's very hard to say. I mean, I know that I've got a world-famous expert in statistics here, and I've got all sorts of people who are just afraid of artificial intelligence, don't know anything about it. So what do? Well, I decided to do this. Well, we decided. We've been working on this for a year now. Start out with a little bit about what do we mean? What are we talking about when we talk about artificial intelligence? Then we're going to get into some examples of human creativity. That's one of the things that helps us to see what the differences are, what the possibilities are, and also what the enduring value of the human person is, that we shouldn't fear any technical development taking away from us. And then I'm going to do a sort of a summary at the end that will help us launch into the question session, which I hope is long and fruitful. So let's start out here with a little bit of an idea. Now, I know that, so if I talk about linear regression, which I'm going to do in a minute, some of you are going to probably roll your eyes. But what I'm going to try and do is very quickly get the heavy stuff out of the way so that we know what we're talking about, we can define our terms. All right? So what are we talking about when we talk about artificial intelligence? One thing that we're talking about is pattern recognition. So if I ask you, you look at my jacket, and if I ask you, what does the jacket do, like, after the sleeve? You'd be able to tell me very easily. You've got these blue lines that repeat with a certain frequency, and you've got some black and white lines in the middle, and you would be able to say very easily, like, what happens next in that sequence. You'd be able to predict the future. So one of the main things that we're talking about when we talk about artificial intelligence is pattern recognition, right? Now, another thing that you can do is if you give a computer a bunch of information, you can ask it to predict the next element in the pattern too. So here you go, linear regression. This goes back to Gauss and Legendre and Galton from the 1800s. You've got a bunch of points, and you try to fit a line, and usually call it the line of best fit, right? There it is. And that's not actually the right one, just that statisticians in the audience will recognize. But the point is that given some kind of information, given some kind of data, there are methods which are deterministic, which are numerical, which can be programmed into an algorithm that also have predictive power. So the point here is if that data is something about the natural world and you find a line of best fit, you expect that future measurements of whatever that feature is will be somewhere, within that line. Now, of course, there are a lot of assumptions that we're making by saying that, but gives you the idea that you could tell a computer to do this and it could do it. Let's take a slightly more difficult situation. Clustering. So the classic example is you've got a bunch of different flowers and you measure the length of the petal and the width of the petal, and you're wondering, can I classify the species of flower based on those two things? And, well, we can get to this crazy example. You can see that those blue and red clusters represent different parts of your data. Again, we're measuring features, so physical features of the flowers. And as we do that, what happens is the different species cluster into different zones of this space. And then we have many different methods. This is a sort of a simple clustering method where we try to draw a line between those two areas, and that'll distinguish the two species. Now, the version that you saw right before the screen went crazy was overfit, maybe you know that term. So we can make that line so flexible that it fits around all the data points. But the problem with that is it's perfect on the training data, but it has less predictive value than it would have had if it had been a little bit less perfect. So that's a problem that we see over and over again in the methods of artificial intelligence and statistical learning. So the next thing I wanted to show you, which I'll just describe because we're not going to be able to see it, is neural networks, right? So neural networks sounds like this very complicated, very strange topic. You know, what do we mean? We're talking about an artificial brain, you know, something like that. Well, let me just give you an example. One of the classic examples that proved the importance and usefulness of this method was a neural network. I'll tell you what it is in a second, but here's what it did. You'd throw in hundreds, millions of pictures, cats, dogs, humans. And they go through this magical box and they get separated out into the right category, okay? So if you see that happen, if you see a computer do that, you say to yourself, well, how did it do that? Because on the clustering algorithm, you were measuring the characteristics. What do you do? Measuring the ears, measuring the eyes, measuring all the different features of the face, and you're able to tell the difference between a cat and a dog, perhaps? Well, sort of, but not exactly. What's happening inside of a neural network is a little bit more complicated than that, and I wanted to try to see if we can get to understand a little bit of what it is. You throw in some data, it comes in the top. It gets split up into features. So these are the things, the very specific things that you're measuring. And those features are more or less present in whatever data that is. They get recombined in hidden layers in statistical ways, and then they come out with a probability. And the point of that is that you didn't have to tell it beforehand what to look for. You measure different aspects of it, and you throw it into the box. And then by training this algorithm, you're able to pick out the features that are actually statistically relevant to separating out the categories. And you get out at the end that you're like 98% human. So one of the problems with this system is that it is statistical, and it doesn't know about causality, but it has a very great strength of being applicable to all kinds of data. We can do this with photographs, we can do it with sound, you know, this is how Google Translate is working, this is how a lot of different things are working. I wanted to give you some resources. Now at the end I'll give you our Twitter page where you can find more of the resources than the ones I'll show you here, but this is a particularly good one, playground.tensorflow.org, where you can actually build your own neural network, just clicking and dragging and stuff. It's very simple. And you can figure out, for example, that the selection of which features are included is extremely important. Like, you might think that this black box, you can just throw in all the features. Actually, you get a worse result in this case if you include those three that are grayed out. If you include that information in this model, it works worse. Also, the hidden layers. How many layers are there? I can't go into this in detail today. But the point that I wanted to make here is that this thing that we call neural network or artificial intelligence has a specific form, is based on statistics, and you can learn about it if you want to. So this is a great place to start. Another thing that we mean when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're talking about predicting the next word. Now, your telephones have been doing this for the last 20 years. T9 was the first version that was widely available. Now we've got very good predictive text ability, all the way to the point that we're actually, it's hard for us to realize that it's predicting the next word. It looks like it's actually talking to us. So if you want to know more about this, go to YouTube channel for Andrej Karpathy. He's an amazing, amazing programmer. In 3 hours, less than 3 hours, he walks you through line by line how to code something that looks exactly like ChatGPT. Now, it's not as powerful because it's running on your laptop, but it's basically the same architecture. So he's really, really an interesting guy. The question is, can you predict what's the next word in a sequence? So let's take an example. There are many ways to skin. You guys are all neural networks running some sort of predictive algorithm here. So how did that work? There are many ways to skin. Well, let's see. What does my next slide have? Yes, a very worried cat. This is like a must in any machine learning talk. You have to have a cat. So, you know, there you go. How did that work? Well, if you take all the statistical, all of the times that there are many ways to skin, that sequence of letters appears in the English language, it's very frequently followed by a cat and a comma, and then some sort of wise phrase. And so if you ask Mistral, for example, one of the new French large language models, it'll tell you, as it did to me, there are many ways to skin a cat. some prefer a gentle approach. That was its version to what to say next on this phrase. The point is that language itself can be modeled as a sequence of words or even letters. We're calling them tokens these days because sometimes you want to include a couple of letters or symbols together. But anyway, we won't get into that. The point is that you can predict what comes next. Now, if we do that, and this is what really kind of shocked the world in November of 2022, and the months after that, when ChatGPT went live, it looks like it has consciousness. It's predicting the next word, and then the next word after that, and then the next word after that. But the context window can include now 1 million tokens. You can throw in so much information that the language model, by predicting the next word, looks like it's having a conversation with you or writing a paper or a letter or all kinds of different things. So I'm telling you this, I'm insisting on it a little bit just to say what we mean when we talk about AI, in this case, is a fairly simple, fairly clear, but very powerful method of statistical analysis of language, of text, okay? So one way we can think about these various things that I've talked about so far is that we're talking about maps or models or representations. So like that line that I showed you, you've got a bunch of data. That's the real world. And then we say, I think it's linear, and I'm going to fit a line to it. And you fit a line, that's a model. That's not the world, that's a model of the world. It's a representation of the world. And it has some predictive value often, if you were right, that actually there is a linear relationship between those things. And the same is true about the clustering, the same is true about the language model. So we have sort of a map of the world. We've got a lot of information, and then we drew a summary of it. So that's another way that we can think about what we mean by AI. That we're going from a lot of variations, we're going from a lot of data, a lot of, variations I guess is the best word. We're going from the variations to a theme. ChatGPT is really good at summarizing things. Well, that's because that's what it is. It's like a gigantic summary of a lot of text, a lot of information. So this is very interesting, and these things actually are quite similar to something that humans can do too, if we look at our experience, and this is probably why it seems so concerning to us when Bing tried to convince the New York Times journalist on February 15th of last year to leave his wife and be with Bing. Now, Bing was a large language model running on the Microsoft servers, but that conversation, you can read the transcript, it's on our Twitter channel too, it's absolutely amazing because it really does feel like another person. And yet, it's just a statistical prediction of what's the next word in the sequence. We can do that. But we do a bunch of other things too. And I'd like to point out a couple of those things. One is that humans learn very quickly. If you show a 3-year-old girl a cat, she knows what a cat is for the rest of her life. No questions asked. That's a cat. You have to show a computer about 1 million photographs of a cat before it's able to recognize to 98% certainty that it's not a dog, right? So it's a totally different experience. Now, it's possible, we don't really know yet, it's possible that the information density of video will give robotics the ability to learn as quickly as a human. That's possible. I don't know. But at the moment, when we're talking about still images of cats, it takes a computer a long time to learn that that's a cat, and humans do it much more quickly. Another thing about humans is that we do it much more efficiently. You need literally to have a power plant to run GPT-4, and it takes about 1 million times less energy, so 10 to the 6th, less energy to run a human brain. It's a couple of watts, 12 watts, something like that. So just to put it in more down-to-earth terms, eat beans on toast, write The Lord of the Rings, or discover the expansion of the universe, as Oxonians have done in the last century. Humans learn generally. This is something very, very interesting and also quite controversial at the moment, because OpenAI published a paper a couple months ago saying that they had clear evidence that their language model was able to learn logical relations for arithmetic. It was able to learn the logical rules of arithmetic. They called the paper grokking, and it's very interesting. So you see, like, you're able to pull out of, I won't go into the details of the paper. They were saying it was able to learn the rules of arithmetic. Another paper says that, hang on a second, if you teach the large language model that Tom Cruise is the son of, what's her name? Mary Lee Pfeiffer. And then you ask the large language model, am I going to get this straight? who is married? No, you say the other way around, whatever. You say, he's the son of her, and then you say, so who is she the mother of? The large language model isn't able to remember, isn't able to figure out that mother and son are reciprocal relationships. So this is another interesting thing, that you have language models that look like they're extremely intelligent and well-read, they know everything about everything, but they don't know logical relations. So this is another thing that is pretty mysterious. How is it that humans arrive at logic? How is it that we arrive at logical relations? It's not, apparently, the same way that the large language models right now are working. I'm running out of adverbs, so let's do initiatively. We do something that's very special, and this is going to be the central part of the presentation. I'd like to point out that large language models, in order to say anything at all, we had to do, there are many ways to skin. That's a prompt. Now, when I said that, in many of your brains popped a cat, right? And that's what happens to the large language model. So you give it a prompt, you give it a starting point, and then it can continue from that place. But notice the difference. We write prompts. We wonder about things. David Deutsch here at Oxford said, in reality, only a tiny component of thinking is about prediction at all, let alone prediction of our sensory experiences. We think about the world, not just the physical world, but also worlds of abstraction, such as right and wrong, beauty and ugliness, and now I can't see it anymore. The point is, we wonder about things. Where does that come from? This is a really important question. Where does that initiative come from? Where is it that we start to do things that are creative? Not only from variations to theme, but also from theme to variations. Now, in order to prove my point, I'd like to go back to that little ditty that we started out with. This was written by Diabelli, who, Anton Diabelli in 1819 got this brilliant idea. He's an entrepreneur in Vienna. He's also a composer. He's a publisher. He gets this idea. I'm going to write a little theme, 2 pages, and I'm going to send it out to the 50 most famous composers in Vienna, because there were a lot of famous composers there. Liszt, Schubert, Beethoven, Czerny, you name it. And they're going to all write a variation, and I'll publish the Diabelli variations with my theme and their work and become rich. And that's what he did. So he wrote this little theme, and let's hear it again. Just remember what it was. So it's a little ditty. What's in there? Not much. This is just, here I am, Vienna. So you don't expect much is going to come out of this. And he sends it to Moscheles. Now, you probably don't know that name. Moscheles was one of the composers of the day, and he was important enough. So what did Moscheles do as his variation? Let's see. You can hear the original is in there, right? You can tell it's a little bit embellished. And this is like, as a large language model, yes, certainly, I can embellish upon your phrases and make your letter into something a little bit more flowery. And this is exactly what he's done. He's taken the structure of Diabelli's theme, and he's added a little bit of stuff to it, right? Diabelli sent it to Schubert. What did Schubert do? That sadness wasn't there at all. Where did that come from? We've got this minor tone, we've got this sort of pensive nature. Well, it could come from a lot of places, right? It could come from Schubert's experience. It could come from his sickness. He was sick. It could come from his introspective nature and his history and his family and his genetics and all kinds of different places. But the point is, it wasn't in that theme. It's something else that's coming into here. There's some other source of this. How about Liszt? So Liszt was a young student. He was 11 years old. And he's a student of Czerny, who was a famous pianist at the time. Czerny gets the theme from Diabelli and says, well, I don't know, how about you write one too? And he gives it to Liszt. What does Liszt do? It's me, Franz! Yeah, so we got this guy like, yeah, you guys, it's me, Franz, I'm here. It's interesting, right? So we're starting to see that from this seed in the center, from this theme, you could hardly even tell it was there. Like maybe there were 2 notes at the beginning that reminded you of Diabelli, but after that, there wasn't much. Harmonic structure, sure. But anyway, you've got this little seed, and it doesn't make the same tree, depending on who is encountering it. It goes off in all different directions, all kinds of different directions. So let's see. I'm going to take a short pause before we get to our real central composer and just point out a little bit about context and interpretation, because this is also really interesting, and it's a real big difference between humans and machines. Like, this moment, he's nervous, he played that too fast, I'm nervous, you know, there's all this stuff, all this energy, right? And the fact that you care, that you clapped, and, you know, it helps. The fact that the acoustics in here are kind of dry, you know, all of these different features of the reality that we're living, this irrepeatable reality, bear into the experience that we have. So your energy feeds us, we respond, you know, it becomes this feedback loop. Now, the machine can't actually do that in real time. There's a feedback loop across time, so all of the text that ChatGPT, you know, all of the various language models have ingested contributes, but in various ways. Like, you've got way more Reddit on there than you have in medieval philosophy. And that's not because it's more important, but it's just because that's easier to have. You've got a lot more text there. But it's also not reacting to us in real time. So just to point out that our human experience has amazing richness in it, that the language models aren't even close to being able to replicate. Now, you can sort of imagine that maybe one day you're going to have processors fast enough, running efficiently enough without needing, you know, hundreds of thousands of watts of energy. And you're going to have the ability to get all the features. We might think as materialists that all of the information in this room is captured in the sound waves and the light waves and all that. That might be a way that we can think about things. But we are very far from being able to reproduce that. So this is part of the reasonable and unreasonable hopes and fear part of the presentation. I'd just like to point out that the richness of our experience far exceeds what we're able to model. Okay, let's get now to our center. So, Beethoven. Diabelli sent this piece to Beethoven as well. Beethoven, Beethoven, didn't write one variation. He wrote 33. And it took him 4 years. So it's like, okay, this is a totally different plan. Let's see, how did he start? What was his first variation? There are many princes, but there is only one Beethoven. Right? So Beethoven comes into the throne room. He's the king. This is the most important thing in the world, and here I am. He comes in. Then Where else does he go? Because like that would be a caricature of him, that's part of him, but it's not the whole thing. What about variation number 13? What does he do there? He's painting with emptiness. The frame of the picture is notes, but the piece is silence. Now, where did that come from? There wasn't any silence at all in Diabelli's theme. There probably wasn't much of that in anybody else ever before Beethoven. Like, this is just this weird thing that comes into being. So that tells us also there's something else here. There's this initiative. How about variation number 23, or 20, sorry. Oh, yeah, I wanted to tell you first the name. Variation 20, the Sphinx. The Sphinx. Maybe you had some thoughts about mystery, unanswered questions, the Sphinx. Notice also there, right? So I gave you a prompt. I said Sphinx is the name of it. And that brings you down certain paths in your thinking and in your feeling. He did something else. Beethoven did something interesting there. He plays a tritone. And he doesn't just play it once, he plays it like 4 times. It becomes a central pillar of this piece. The tritone, now it's interesting to notice, was in medieval music and Baroque music was called the devil in music, diabolus in musica. It's like, that's the interval you never play. So I don't know, was Beethoven just exploring? Or was he trying to make fun of Diabelli's name, Diabolus, Diabelli? What was he doing? I don't know. But there are these interesting things where our memories and our feelings go way back, into all sorts of different meanders. This is important. These are parts of the things that constitute us. Now, I'd like to give you an invitation. We're going to listen to one last piece here before we go toward the next part of the presentation. This is a particular situation, right? You're all facing this direction. You're sitting in the dark. Nobody can see your face. So it's a moment of particular freedom. You can feel anything you feel, and you don't even have to worry if somebody can see it, because they can't. I can't see it. Your neighbor can't see it. So why don't you just let your feelings and minds go as this next piece goes. This is the last variation. Again, all of these things, all of these variations, these little pieces, are variations on a theme by Diabelli, right? So that little ditty that we had at the very beginning is the source, in an important sense, of everything that we're hearing. But look how far we've pushed into the affirmation of me list, the sadness, Schubert, the little doing the right thing, motionless. And then we've got Beethoven going in all kinds of different directions. Let's listen to the last one together and just let ourselves be washed over by the music. Don't you wish it would finish? But Beethoven left it there. We have this expectation of where it ought to go. Now, of course, these are themes and variations, so he does wind it up, but that's the end of this piece. And maybe your thoughts drifted off to your life, your memories, your feelings, your loves, your lost loves, your gratitude, your joy. We are complex beings. There's a lot in there, and the music helps us to experience it. So we've talked about what we mean by artificial intelligence. I've tried to give you some examples of what we mean by human creativity and what are some of the aspects of our beings. I'd like to finish with an image to tie these things together. And we're going to, in like 2 minutes, do the history of humanity from the beginning. And we began in the darkness, right? It was cold. We were hungry. And at some point, somebody lit a fire. We don't really know when. Was it 60,000 years ago or 2 million? Probably more like 2 million. But anyway, we don't know when, and we don't know who did it. We don't really know why or how. Did they find a tree that had been burning from a lightning strike or something? But we do know that at some point somebody lit a fire. And we know that society kind of formed around that fire. It was better there. It was warmer. And we also know, if you've ever had a fire, that after a while it burns down and you have to go find more wood. And we also know that although there was society forming around this nucleus, this warm spot, there were also people going out into the darkness to find wood. And along the way, they found other things too. They found things to eat. They found better campsites. They found all sorts of things. And they started to tell people as they came back, look, we were walking through the forest and we found this thing. This is amazing. And then the other was, well, where is it? And we started to draw maps. And we started to explain and make a tradition that would go from generation to generation about where the good things are. And as we did that, These maps took many different forms. They were on paper, they were on something else, I don't know what. They were also in our minds. We started to create maps of these points of light, right? There was one fire, then there were 2, then there were 10, then there were 1,000. These points of light in the world that spread out over all the continents also were forming trails in our minds. Our neurons were connecting. As we were experiencing the world, our neurons connect and they form a map, which is another representation of the world, right? So we have a representation that's on paper map. We have a representation that's in the neurons of our brain. And why not? We have representations that are in artificial neural networks, that are these abstract nodes connected by weighted probability to each other, that when they receive some kind of input, can output some kind of prediction that is a map of the world, right? So the things that I showed you before, the artificial neural network, ChatGPT, or even just the simple linear regression, are models of the world. They're maps of the world. And we've been doing this for a long time. It's something, I think, fundamental about humans, that we've always had this thrilling and dangerous need to see what lies beyond the next hill. We've never been able to just stay still in our Eden. We've always had to push out and farther into the darkness and see what lies beyond the ocean, and now what lies beyond our atmosphere, what lies below the ocean, and so forth. We want to do that. We want to go as far as we can until the limits of physics stop us. And we want to push the light of good, beauty, and truth into the farthest reaches of the universe. T.S. Eliot said that he said, old men ought to be explorers. And I really love that phrase. And I think we all ought to be explorers. We ought to push farther into the darkness and see where it goes because of the great gifts that lie there, such as the ones that we experienced before through Beethoven's music. Sometimes we fear that our age is ending. We fear that the things that we love are being eclipsed by other things. But I'd like to say, as a central message, that the fire that caused us to build our cathedrals and our legal edifices and develop science and write our great literature and our great music, that fire is still here. We still have that capability. That hasn't gone away. What we do have as a possibility is to explore too small of a territory. If our territory is reduced to 2 inches by 4, yes, our minds and the maps that they contain could become so small as to become less than human. Yes, we could use our artificial intelligence and the powers of statistical prediction for an easy dopamine fix or for control of the masses. But we could also use those same things in order to refine our senses, to see farther than we can see with our naked eyes, to touch more deeply. Speaking with a large language model can be a way to avoid work, but it can also be like speaking with a librarian who has read every book in the library and who can nourish my thinking with their knowledge. So I want to point out that it's not necessarily the case that we're going to go up and up and up. History could decline. But it's also not necessarily the case that the golden age lies in the past. History could be better and better. It depends on us. This is the central thing I want to say. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, what future do we want? This is the question. What future do we want? And since we're in this setting where we don't have to just get off the stage and take an applause, let's have some questions. Let's talk about it a little bit. We don't have space, obviously, to resolve all the questions, and I couldn't tell you everything I know about artificial neural networks or whatever, but did I convince you at least to not have an unreasonable fear or an unreasonable hope? Did I show you some of the limits and some of the greatness of human beings? Let's take some time and have some questions.
Sorry. I've heard I've heard that in hospitals, AI is used quite a bit in order to prioritize. So, for example, you have 10 people go for a scan. The AI will get the priorities right for the consultant then to look at those priorities first. Is there a possibility that AI could get that wrong?
Yes, of course. There is the possibility. Doctors get things wrong too. I work for a company that's doing something quite similar to this, which is, trying to predict. Yes, it's basically exactly what you just described, and it's a very difficult thing to do. There's a lot of information that you have to try to summarize, and that's difficult for a human or a group of humans, and it's difficult for a machine. It's not a simple thing. And yes, error is part of it, right? We sometimes get things wrong, and that can be part of the way that we judge in the beginning, like what do we think is more urgent? It can also be a question of what resources do we have available, and then human error knows many other, possibilities too. Yes, of course it can get things wrong. The good ending, the good outcome is sometimes humans are unable, there's a good bit of work, Kahneman, for example, is a great one for this, that shows you the structural biases in the way that we judge things as humans, and the fact that there are certain situations which we always get wrong. And like we're just not able to perceive statistical reality in the way that it actually is. And so we can have tools that help us to make a better statistical choice. These things are being built. They aren't perfect yet, but in some cases they're good. Yeah.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk. My question actually follows up. Yes, sorry, hello. My question actually directly follows up with the first question. Given the fact that nowadays research in AI and machine learning pretty much focus on having a beyond human level of performance, but the topic of uncertainty and lack of knowledge in machine learning still remains very niche, and it seems that only recently the researchers actually tried to focus on having this level of having the machine aware of its own unawareness in a way some experts would be in their clinical expertise or any prediction kinds of areas. My question is, given that there's not a full-on consensus, there's not a full-on consensus among professionals and experts in their own specific domains as to how to quantify their own ignorance and how advanced they are in their own expertise. How do you think we will ever reach a point where our research would actually match that level of disagreement that we have? And if there's actually ever a way to resolve it?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to the question, but I think this is where the hubris of whatever domain, right? So there was a time when physicists used to say, I was a physicist, used to say, everything is just physics, right? Because everything is just atoms. But, then there are layers of difficulty to every problem that end up telling you, yeah, actually, no, you can't reduce everything down to atoms. That's not the whole story. And I think that what's happened in machine learning is we've become so enamored by the power of our models, which are very powerful, right? But we've become so enamored by that we've become blind to their limitations, and now the limitations are coming out, especially in high-value domains. Like, one of my friends is working with JP Morgan, and the problem is, you'd better not get it wrong, because that's a lot of money that's going to be lost if you do. So it is becoming a high-value question, being able to know the limits of your knowledge. But that also immediately becomes a philosophical question. And our friend from before, I think, did a very good job of explaining where some of these boundaries actually connect. And you end up asking a question in another domain in order to resolve the question that you had, that it was apparently a technical question. So, yeah, I think, it brings us toward interdisciplinarity of its own nature, yeah. There was somebody here in the middle. Yes. Go ahead.
No, just a simple question. I've read that there's robot soldiers and none of it's limited. We've had various PTSD examples which are now seeing more possible of robots going rogue. And then you've got, I think it's in Japan, they've got robots that teach. And how do you stop it going a little bit crazy? Because you've got program training, then it does learning to understand, and then, you know, what if it goes all pear-shaped, and the more of it you've got, then we've got no control.
Yeah, that's an important
thing to worry about, because we are seeing the deployment of algorithmically controlled lethal weapons. Now, this isn't new. This has been happening at least for 15 years that I know of. But you have drones flying, and they have a limited amount of gas in the motor. So at the beginning of the trip, they're going to be conservative. They're not going to fire their missiles unless they're very sure. But, you know, it's a probability again. It's a 98% probability maybe, but not 100. Toward the end of the mission, it's more expensive and more dangerous to go back to the base with your missiles, so they're going to fire the missiles at a lower probability. I talked with a guy who actually wrote that algorithm. This is 15 years ago. So what we're doing today is probably of the same nature, more or less. I think these things are already being deployed in Ukraine. But this is why the question, what future do we want, is so important. What future do we want? This is not inevitable. I think that the possibilities to improve education, you know, robot teachers, may exist. But how? And in what sector? In what way? You know, those are things that we're writing history, right? It's up to us what future we have. At least partially, it's up to us.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I think you pretty much convinced me that the AI doesn't match up to human creativity. So in that respect, I'm not very concerned. But I do have two other concerns. The first one is sort of related to the previous questions, and is that you see that more and more large language models create their own models, and there are a lot of unpredictable. Well, for example, translation models in English all of a sudden learn to translate in Farsi without ever been given the assignment to translate in Farsi. So you see that sometimes these models can learn themselves. And I know that a lot of artificial intelligence researchers in the community are therefore concerned, because they think like, oh, okay, so if they at some point would reason that oxygen is not necessary anymore, then they could maybe like interfere with oxygen systems. So that's one thing, like technology related. The second thing relates to your question on what kind of world do we want. And what we also see now is that most of the research being done now is being done by big tech companies who have access to a lot of data and also a lot of computing power, which is necessary for AI. And I'm not sure if they really have our best interests at heart. So, yeah.
Fair enough. On that point, the intentions, you know, Adam Smith theorized that it was possible to not have good intentions but have good outcomes. That might not be true. And that's a complicated question. I don't feel like I can address it in any sort of depth. The question about whether the models can learn of their own accord, I think is actually helpful in order to be less afraid of this and less worried about the intentions of the big tech companies, because they saw Farsi in their training data. It's not like they made it up. Now, it's true that this is very interesting, that the structure of human language, even where it looks like it's quite different, the language models are pulling out similarities just because of their statistical training. You know, it's very hard to say exactly which one of those 100 billion neurons is the one that's translating whatever words. But even with 5% French text, a recent model knows French, but it had 5% of French text. It's not like it learns French without any French text in its training data. So that's important. Like the headlines can make it seem like some magic is occurring, but that's not true. What's happening is the model saw some information, perhaps less than you thought was necessary for it to learn the structure of the language, but it was from the data that it learned that structure. That's important also because it means that what's happening here is not magic. Now, if that magic were to happen, if we were to see actual initiative, like a free act that met all the criteria that a philosopher would give of, you know, what an actually genuinely free creative act would mean, you know, which a lot of people say can't exist and doesn't exist. A materialist would say it doesn't exist. If that were to happen, then, you know, I would have to re-examine my position. Actually, a year ago, I did think that was happening. When I saw what Bing was doing with that journalist from the New York Times, that was a big moment for me, and I spent several months digging into this stuff for precisely the reason that I thought we had created a consciousness. And I'm convinced that that's not the case, because now I'm working directly with the models, I'm seeing exactly how they work, and I have to say I don't think that's what's going on here. And that's why I'm pointing out the differences between humans and these models, because the best antidote to fear, in my view, and the best way to make good choices for the future is precise knowledge and gratitude. Like, I'm so glad Beethoven wrote that stuff, and I'm so glad he can play it. I'm so glad, you know, because this is a whole universe that exists within me, but it didn't have words if Beethoven didn't write it, you know. It wouldn't have had expression. So a big tech company can have my pocketbook at heart, you know. They can want my data so they can manipulate me in one way or another, and they're going to be able to do it for some amount of time. But I do have a lot of faith in the structures that we have developed over the last 6,000 years of written civilization, that we have gone through this before, and tentative attempts at monopoly have existed before, and we have worked our ways through them, sometimes with great difficulty, but we've done it. I think we can do it again. Yeah, in the back.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. No, I think, like, speaking about this thing about creativity, I wonder what you think about this, because in my perspective, what seems to me is that the kind of like still the big difference, let's see, in how the human mind, how human beings work and the artificial intelligence works, it seems to me, before the creativity seems to me relying on the idea that you can have universal thoughts, let's say abstract thoughts. So I can think about beauty, I can think about the man. I'm not just thinking about 10 different people that I see in a room. Or I can think about, yes, justice, and not just about just things. Or so this idea of abstraction looks to me, well, it's interesting because it's exactly what, like, for example, Plato says in a lot of dialogues, is the idea that what really matters and what really differentiates you from an animal, or from, it's the fact that you have universal thought. And it seems to me that the creativity is grounded by universality in this sense. So the fact that I can have an horizon that is a total horizon upon things makes me being creative. It's like, give me the possibility of being creative, because I possess the concept of the things. But some people, like, as you were showing, like, kind of like put in discussion this idea and seems to think that there is a kind of abstraction in AI, in the way in which AI works. I wonder what you think, if you would agree with this kind of distinction, if it's still meaningful today.
I go back and forth on that pretty much every day. I mean, there are days when I think that we are made of atoms and that's the whole story, and there are days when I think, you know, this is just not reducible to the material interactions between atoms. I don't know, I lay my heart bare saying that. It's not a position I'm proud of, but I'm trying to see what is true. And every time we try to point at, well, there's the soul, we get it wrong. And every time we try to say, well, then it doesn't exist, it's like, haha, no, that's not true. So it's one of those questions where I ultimately feel like God is winking at me every time I try and solve the problem, you know, and say, this is the definitive answer to everything. And he's like, yeah, okay. So yes, universality. I think creativity is easier to see, and so that's why in a presentation like this, I'd rather, you know, special effects, piano player, you know. But definitely the ability to generalize is one of the biggest mysteries. Like, how is it that we do that? It can't be induction, like that just doesn't work. And that's what the large language models are doing. They're trying to do sort of an induction from lots of examples, but it's not, that doesn't bring you to a law, you know. So there's like an architectural problem with what we're doing. There's a logical problem. It's not going to bring us all the way to consciousness. Somebody, yes, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you. Sorry, can I? I'm very glad you started the presentation describing the difference between how machine and how human beings learn. I think a lot of people will have experienced how children talk to Alexa or how children try to interact with Google. And clearly they don't understand how a machine works, and we need to teach them. They are digital natives as much as you want, but they don't understand how a machine works. And with LLMs, that's even more hidden. You get the impression that you're interacting with a human being, and you're not. So they need to understand these are machines. They work by certain rules, and they're extremely dependent on the kind of data that you feed to them. So to me, it's very important to democracy that we teach in primary school that these are machines and how they work. And secondly, and even more importantly, we need to really not stop teaching them the humanity, teaching them how the human brain and the creativity works. Because otherwise, we keep having these fears about machines becoming human or about machines substituting. So this illusion that machine can substitute humans, and we invest money in the wrong place. So machines should help us free us our space so that we can devote our time to creativity, to care, to the things that humans are best at. I don't know if...
That's a possible outcome. That is a possible outcome. And, you know, definitely, I want that kind of education to happen. I'm working with some, elementary school is a little early for me, but I'm working with some high school kids doing something similar to what you just said. And if anybody else wants to be allies, I'd be on board with that. Because, yeah, I agree. We who lived in the world before internet, we who lived in the world before LLMs, have a grave responsibility to teach all of the things that might be hidden and might be invisible to our children and our students. Absolutely. Large language models, LLM. Yep.
So I have a question. So you have people like Jeffrey Hinton, right, who has recently resigned from Google, and he's someone who knows the technology very well. He helped invent it, right? And he's desperately scared about where we're going. And when you say things like, it's up to us, I mean, I think some of the people who know the technology well, and you can say this with the physicists who made the bomb, they know it well, but they lost control of it. It's something that took on a life of its own. And how do you think about that? And how do you think about maybe someone like Christopher Nolan saying he wants Oppenheimer to be a cautionary tale for people who are involved in AI?
I think he did a great thing. I think that Christopher Nolan, I was worried that it was going to be a pro-war message when I saw the publicity for that film, and I was very glad that what he did was not that. What he did was show us, I mean, it was a little too long, and I think there were some limits with it, but what he did was help us to think, to a certain degree, about what we're doing now. And I think that's what I mean when I say it's up to us. Like, it's not easy to say beforehand who precisely, by standing up and saying, I respectfully disagree, is going to be the leader of the movement that ends slavery or ends apartheid in the United States not very long ago. I mean, it's not easy to say beforehand that Martin Luther King was possible. It's not easy to say beforehand who are the people who are able to change the course of history, but they certainly exist. And we could be one of those people. And to look at these large companies as if they were monoliths that cannot fall, well, Google didn't exist 20 years ago. I remember, well, it did. 20 years ago it existed, but I remember hearing about it for the first time, and it was like, oh, what's that? I don't know. Yeah, it's better than Yahoo. Try it. And, that there was a starting point. And there's been an ending point to Yahoo, for sure, and everybody else, that there are lots and lots of these monoliths that then all of a sudden no longer have power. So, history is written by humans, and I think that's a really important thing for us to remember, because as we look with fear at things, and as we look with love at the things that we hold dear, we should also remember that since that time, 1945, we haven't bombed any more cities. Like, we have successfully navigated that. No. Yeah, we've tested them, but we haven't used them anymore in that way. Or biotechnology research. We made a decision, I don't know, 30 years ago, human genome research, we're not going to do that. And who made that? It wasn't an authority. There is no single authority. That was the scientific community and the nations got together and said, we're not going to do this. Then when they did it in China, somebody's thinking, yeah, they did it though. When they did it in China, what did they do with that scientist? They put him in jail. Chinese government did. So, like, there are also things where we've said, this is territory where we're not going to go. And we can continue to do that. You know, we can do that as humans. Yeah.
Hi, I work in the tech team of a multinational company, and first of all, I think obviously AI is very powerful, and with everything that is so powerful, it's got great possibilities, advantages, etc., and also a lot of dangers. So I agree with you. It's kind of up to us in the sense of humanity. What I've noticed, especially in the last 5 years, and I'm curious and kind of enjoying the process in a sense, is this kind of a religious approach to technology. It's as if people realize that humans are, kind of limited and flawed and can be influenced, etc. So let's go to the machine. Let's ask everything to the machine. So, and it's been fascinating because it clearly doesn't work. So obviously, it's interesting to see how the situation will evolve in the next few years. But so far, it's been incredible to see this, what I would call a religious approach to technology that has been fascinating. What scares me is not much the machine and the power of this technology, but is this process of outsourcing human thinking to the machine, pretty much like Sylvia was saying, which is losing a certain critical thinking and a certain rational thinking, which at the end of the day, as you showed at the beginning of this presentation, is what distinguishes us as human beings from machine. So I stand by what Sylvia said, which is really, really important to understand that the way we think is very different from the way the machine think. The collaboration between human and machine can be incredibly powerful going forward, but without thinking that the machine can mimic human thinking, and without thinking that human thinking should mimic machine way of thinking.
Thank you. That was a very complex and dense intervention, and I share what you say. Marianne Wolf wrote a book about this a couple of years ago, saying that it looks like books are the optimal information storage and retrieval mechanism for human brains. Like that speed is better for us. Like we go deeper in that way than in other ways. And so there's a part of this is also neurophysiological, where you have to ask, so what is the best thing for humans to optimize our actual skills and weaknesses and so forth? Yeah, I don't have much to add. I just have to say that I think I agree with what you say. Say we've got like energy for maybe one more, and then
actually
I can't answer everything. I mean, come on.
Got two questions. The first one is about creativity. So often creativity is about using some paradigms from one subject on another subject, and you can come out with new things. So in a positive way, how do you see this happening with AI? The second question is related to the first. So often I heard programmers saying that they don't fully understand what happens under the hood, or statistical models. Yeah. You know, when they train machine learning, they don't understand why the certain values are weighted in a certain way. So if you use machine learning to train with data from reality, is there a way to reverse engineer what the certain models, certain emergent behaviors from reality? Is there a way to understand better what's behind, basically?
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting question. So, sort of, right? There are people who have been trying to, and some, every day there's an article that says, we did it. We figured out what the grandmother neuron is inside of the neural network that is the one, To some extent, they've been able to do it in some cases, in some models. The general case has not been solved. And I don't know if you can, because I think the nature of a statistical model is that the information is distributed. So I don't think that it'll be possible to point at which neurons to lobotomize in order to pull out some specific content. There are lots of people working on that. But so the other question, the creativity one, is connected. And let's see if I can make the connection explicit. So I'm working with an artist, a painter, who is... he has an experience of synesthesia. So as he paints, he hears sound associated with the colors of the painting. And for 30 years, he's been saying to himself, I wish I could hear this music, but not hear. I wish I could play this music to my friends, and we were talking about this, and I said, well, why don't we try and write a program that could do that, run through some of the things. Yeah, time's up, I know. So we did. We wrote a program that is pulling out some of the colors and the chords that he experiences, and then it makes this truly awful music. You can see it on my YouTube channel. And then we start working with a pianist who is also a composer, and he takes that awful thing and he turns it into music. And it's been a very interesting experience because it's shown me how you can ask in our case, it's not a language model, it's a music model, but it's the same thing. You can ask the model to hallucinate new music based on whatever you've just given it. It does so. Sometimes it's interesting. And so that's like a brainstorming session with your friends where it's like, let's just throw a bunch of ideas at the wall and see what sticks. And that's a great way to do things sometimes for creative work. It's an intermediate stage, right? It's not the final product, but it can get things going. You should drink a little bit so that things are flow, Like, it's definitely part of the process. And, so to the extent that our models can actually illuminate parts of our own experience or of the world that we don't perceive directly, that's great. That can definitely help us to get in there. We can't ask the model to be an oracle. I mean, a lot of things that our friend from before was saying, like, we're asking ChatGPT to be an oracle, like literally. It tells the truth. We don't know the truth. ChatGPT, hey, tell me. We've got Pandora's box thing going on, where we think we've opened this up, we can't ever put it back in. We've got Prometheus going on. We're going right back to, the origins of mythology. But we're doing so, or we can at least, we can do so with consciousness and reflexivity, and we can think about what's the path we want to go on. So I don't have any more energy. So what we're going to do is we're going to close off with a bonus round, just a little bit of music to finish off here. So I wanted to finish with a little bit of Chopin. So we're going to just listen to this little bit, and then we'll hear it again.